Okay, so again, I'm going to record this lab. And what I want to do is explain a few things first. First off, I'm going to, Glynis, I'm going to let Cheyenne and Sarai show you how to use the balance. Okay, so what we're going to do first in this lab is actually make up an ointment based on putting a solid into generic Vaseline, petrolatum. This is a common ingredient in the pharmacy, petrolatum. It's neutral, it has no pharmacological activity, it's a good moisturizer, it's a lot of different things. So we use it for a lot. What you're going to do is mix a small amount of blue sugar, our active ingredient, and powdered sugar, which is our inactive ingredient. You're going to weigh them out, and then you're going to triturate. Triturate, Cheyenne and Sarai, remember, is grinding with the mortar and pestle. And you're going to grind it into a smooth, consistent powder. And then what we'll do is, normally in a pharmacy, you would have an ointment slab, which is either hard plastic or marble or a very hard glass surface. We don't have a slab to use here. So what we're going to do is we're going to put wax paper down on top of this table paper and mix on there. And what we're going to do is, after we grind this material, we're going to take it, dump it out, and make a nice little pile of it on the wax paper. All of you are going to work together on this. And then take an amount of this, I believe a tablespoon, and put it out onto the slab next to the pile of powder that we've made. And then we're going to take small amounts, a process we call geometric dilution. We'll take a small amount of the petrolatum, which will also be on that slab, and mix it into as smooth a paste as we can with the material, the powder. And then we will basically double that volume by picking up more of the petrolatum and mixing that in thoroughly, and then double it again by mixing in more. So this is called geometric dilution. It is a lot more efficient than trying to take all of it at the same time and mix it up, because when we're mixing small amounts, we're able to get a uniform paste a lot faster, and then it's easier to just add to it after that. All right, so you guys want to demonstrate the use of the scale first for Glynis?
You put your paper on. It'll say 0.4, and you got it zeroed out, and then you can put your product on.
And then just record the weight. So you'll be recording the weight. If you look on page 2, you'll see that when we take the colored sugar, which in this case is going to be blue sugar, we're going to use a small amount of that, 1/4 of a teaspoon. And you'll weigh it, record that weight, and then weigh out 1/2 teaspoon of the powdered sugar. Since there are 3 of you, let's double it, because you're going to share this. Okay, let's double it, and then we'll make up the paste with an extra amount. Actually, don't bother to double it, because we're going to just throw this away. Make just one, as it says, 1/4 of a teaspoon of the blue and 1/2 teaspoon of the powdered sugar. So go ahead and do that. And they can also, what I'd like you to do, both Cheyenne and, well, no, you weren't here last Wednesday. Oh, yeah, you were. Both Cheyenne and Sarai did this ground up material last time, so I'll let them get it started, but I'd like you to work on and do the majority of that, okay? So you can get some practice with it. This will get you set up for making up whatever way we decide how to make up the lab.
What was the lab?
The lab was the capsule lab. Okay. So we'll figure that one out, how you're going to do that later. Okay? All right.
You guys make them? Mm-hmm.
Yeah. They made pink capsules. And they filled them by hand. Yeah, we made it, we ground it up in this mortar and pestle. This glass bowl, don't mess with this yet. It will be for making the lip balm. Okay? So go ahead and weigh those out. Using, I have the teaspoon measures, sugar, and then powdered sugar. So we want to weigh out, pardon? And remember that if you're working in a pharmacy, you'd have your hair up. Not just a ponytail, but you'd have it actually up.
Like in a bun?
Yeah.
What is it, teaspoon? That we're gonna have to do. Oh, okay.
Make sure you record all these weights on page 2.
Okay, so 1/2 teaspoon of cornstarch.
So we're using powdered sugar.
Put it on here.
Now we want to weigh it out first. And then
I don't need
you'll
to level it or anything?
level.
Okay, that's fine.
Level.
Mm-hmm. 1.4.
So that's 1.4 grams of the powdered sugar. So then put that into the mortar. Right?
Would we use a different wax paper?
Yes, you would. Always, you don't cross-contaminate anything. Even inert ingredients. You measure them all separately.
Teaspoon.
Quarter of a teaspoon. Right?
Mm-hmm.
So you're struggling over here. You can do a little bit more.
That's okay.
Yeah.
$1.1 grams.
Okay.
So 2.5 total.
Okay, so get started on the trituration.
It
It
says
says
grind it until all the little.
in the instructions, it says to first put the active ingredient, grind it.
That is not absolutely necessary. If you had a large amount of material, you would always grind the active ingredient first. With small amounts of material like this, it doesn't matter. But yeah, properly speaking, you put in the active, grind it into a fine powder, and then add the inactive. But as I say, in something as small as this,
Molly. I tried the, have you heard Molly from that or something?
Is that on Canon?
Yeah. I tried those.
I know somebody, I think it's like $20 for them.
That's not bad.
They're really good. And it's a church. I don't go to, but they're trying to have one here.
Yeah.
So they're making. Yeah, every Friday they deliver it to the house.
Really?
Hmm.
Yeah, I'm like,
They're
How
really
does that
good.
look?
do you see blue specks?
just on the side.
Get them all. Yeah, we have a friend here in Fort Collins who used to. Now she's gotten too busy with her other job, but she used to make tamales. And she made some unbelievable green chili and cheese tamales that were just so delicious. When I was younger, the only tamales that I ever had were commercial, and they were awful. When I started having homemade tamales, I discovered how wonderful they can be.
Yeah, get them from Walmart.
Yeah,
But they're decent.
yeah. Well, the commercial ones are getting better,
Yeah.
but getting them from someone who makes them in their home, you can. Okay, so there's still some white over there that I see.
Oh, okay.
So grind all of that in.
Can I use anything to get it off the side? Or?
You can use that because you're going to be using that to scrape it out anyway. So.
And this is what you guys did to make the capsules.
Mhm. We couldn't really get it grinded down well enough though. To get rid of that pink.
Well, you're always going to have some pink.
Yeah. Can we turn this back into you after we make the
You can, and then if you want to keep it after I see the label, you can keep it.
I still have to make,
I saw you.
I still gotta make a label for the mouthwash, yeah.
Yeah.
But,
Yeah, and you need to get all of that turned in.
yeah. I'll do that before you leave.
And Glynis, can you stay a few minutes to talk? Good.
And I'll finish those two.
That looks good. So now you want to scrape it out, put out a layer of waxed paper. No, not the weighing paper. We're going to use the waxed paper because you're going to be using that for a mixing surface. And remember what I said, you're going to put that out and then put out a tablespoon of petrolatum. and use a spatula to gradually fold in the petrolatum into the solid. So we want to make an initial, thank you, paste. We're done with that. Want to make an initial paste, and then gradually add the rest of the petrolatum.
So the 1 tablespoon of the Vaseline.
Mm-hmm. And you'll probably have to use the spatula to get everything out of the tablespoon. Well, you have the one already. Why don't you just use that, because you're going to use it anyway to mix this up. So scoop it out, set it on the side. There you go. And get as much of it out as you can. And then we'll talk about how we're going to clean these things when we get done. I wouldn't worry about getting everything off the spatula, because you're going to use the spatula to mix anyway.
Pretty well.
Here, I'll let you set it on that. So what you want to do is take a small amount of the petrolatum and mix it into the powder.
You couldn't do it the other way.
No, because what you want to do is keep the concentration of the powder high at first. So you want to take stuff from the pile of petrolatum and mix it in first. And it'll be kind of like a thick paste, but try to, you'll want to get as much of it, you want to get all of the particles of the solid in contact with some of the petrolatum.
And when it gets stuck to the spatula,
It's okay. You'll just scrape it off.
we can run out to it.
No. If you're going to do that, you need to use this. You never touch it. Normally speaking, what you'll have in most labs is actually 2 metal spatulas, and you'll be constantly scraping one with the other as you mix. But gradually, yeah. So now you've got some on there. You've got some mixed in. So add some more, about twice as much petrolatum as you put in the first time. And continue to mix it. You can, all 3 of you can work with this. So I'd suggest all of you work on some of this mixing. So now you've got that in. Let someone else take over and add in more petrolatum. And again, what you want to do is, again, take enough petrolatum to double the size of the stuff you're mixing. Yeah.
Can we just add the rest?
At this point, you can put in the rest. So why don't you take over, Glynis, and do that.
Literally all of it?
Literally all of it, because you've only got about that much left. So. And the thing is, when you're mixing up these ointments, you're usually told what amount to make, so you make extra, because there will be some losses. There'll be some stuff you won't be able to get everything out of here. You won't be able to get all of the ointment off, but you mix all of that into a uniform
Will we put
mix.
more than that? Equally?
Yeah, equally. You know, what you want is the right concentration. So if you are asked, in this case, if we were being asked to prepare, say, 2 tablespoons of material, we would actually increase everything by roughly a quarter and mix up all of that, because ultimately, and we'll be doing this with the lip balm, but ultimately you're going to put this mixture into an ointment jar. And when you put it into an ointment jar, these spatulas are too big to do this really properly. But what happens is you'll put some in around the edges and push it down to the bottom, because you want to fill the bottom first. You want to eliminate as much as possible air pockets. So you'll put it in, and you'll have a small spatula that will enable you to make sure it gets well put into the bottom. That's too thick to get into here. Okay? So we won't be doing that. We'll be doing that with the lip balm, but the lip balm will be liquid when we pour it in. So we don't have to worry about the size of our spatula. But normally speaking, we would take that spatula or a smaller one and gradually put stuff around the edge, push it down, and force it into the bottom, and then keep doing that until it's
So we
filled
can't
up.
do it with this?
We're not going to do it with
Okay.
this. No, we don't have the right. We don't have the right equipment to do that. But that's the method that we normally use. Now that stuff is just basically sweet petrolatum, and normally speaking, this would be made up for a skin treatment of some sort. Maybe the person is having some sort of skin allergic reaction to some topical agent. And you'd mix up a therapeutic, an anti-inflammatory therapeutic into your petrolatum, and you'd put that on. I don't think anybody here wants to put on a bunch of sugar on the outside of their arms. But you know, that's basically what we're trying to do. But you can see that what we're aiming for, and I see probably that's light reflection. What you want to do is make sure that it is very uniform. If it's colored like this, it's easy to see when it's uniform. If it's not colored, and most things won't be, then it'll be a lot harder to do that. So we're very careful, and we're patient, and we mix them thoroughly. And we keep smoothing them out. If we're making large amounts of these things, there's actually, are you all familiar with the old Wringer washing machines?
Yeah.
Right? Well, there is what we call an ointment mill, which takes 2 marble rollers that are right next to each other, and it will roll this stuff and mix it and further grind all of the particles. Unlike the old Wringer washers, if you get your fingers caught in it, they're not going to spring loose. So you have to be very careful using them. There is a risk of damage with that. But the idea is that you have you have this roller that is continually mixing things. And again, there's another reason that we make extra, because of course it's impossible to get everything off the rollers. Cleaning it requires taking it apart and cleaning the rollers. Today, when we clean this equipment that we've just used, what we're going to do is use the Santa wipes over here on the counter first. We use a paper towel to pull off most of the greasy stuff, use the Santa wipes to clean it, and then we use soap and water to finally. Okay? So, what did you learn here? Pardon?
There's a lot of sugar in here.
Well, there's a lot of sugar. Yeah, that's one. Yeah. We don't want to mix it all at once because it is much harder to get a consistent mixture. Okay?
It would have been easier to mix it.
Pardon?
It would have been easier to mix it with some of these.
No, because the spatula has the advantage that you can press things down and separate the powders. Because the powder is going to tend to clump, and you're going to tend to have basically bubbles of powder inside the petrolatum if you can't mash it out. So while we're going to be using glass rods when we're doing the lip balm, because we have to stir the solids. It doesn't work when we're preparing an ointment. Okay. Take a look at this. Okay, so activity 1 was grinding. Activity 2 was this this mixture you just made. So now we're going to go on to activity 3. We're going to prepare a lip balm. Okay. Now here's what's going to happen there. We have several components. We're going to be mixing the active ingredient is going to be Kool-Aid. Okay, but that goes in last. All right. So we are going to weigh the amount of Kool-Aid. Then we are going to mix the components there. We have beeswax. We have, I believe, petrolatum and let me just take a quick look. And coconut oil. And we're going to measure out the amounts that they list here. We have half a tablespoon of beeswax, which is these little beads right here. 2 tablespoons of the coconut oil and 1.5 tablespoons of the petrolatum. We're going to do it in this mixing bowl. And we're going to do it there because we have to melt it. The only place we have to melt it, we're going to go into the student lounge and use the microwave. And we will melt this gradually. We'll microwave it for 30 seconds, use the stirring rod to mix things up, microwave it again for another 30 seconds, and we'll keep doing that until everything liquefies.
You know when you buy like chapstick at the store,
Mm-hmm.
there's some that's like really greasy on your lips. And there's some that's not.
Mm-hmm.
Which one is that?
It is the amount of grease, petrolatum, that goes into it. If you use more beeswax, it will be less oily feeling. Petrolatum is given to make it smoother, but petrolatum is greasy. And so some preparations of lip balm are greasier than others, and that's because they use a lot more oils. When I've done this before down in Denver, I've used beeswax. I have used coconut butter, cocoa butter, instead of coconut oil, and several other components. Honey, I throw in honey to flavor it. Always nice to have something that's kind of sweet when you put it on your mouth, right? Part of that is to overcome two therapeutic agents that we used to throw in, thymol and menthol. Well, you're all familiar with menthol, so you know what that's like. Thymol is kind of a bitter material. It is a mild antifungal, and it's in a lot of lip balms that people have. And it really gives it kind of an astringent flavor, but it also is a therapeutic. And then we throw in something oilier. But I was using a water bath for melting that as well. In this particular case, you're going to mix up all these things. You're going to you're not going to use the balance except to weigh out the Kool-Aid. So you're going to mix these components in this bowl. And again, working all three of you. So what I want you to do is note we've got that 2 tablespoons weighs 60 grams. So that's going to be the coconut oil. We have 2 tablespoons of coconut oil. A teaspoon is 4.8 grams. So that means 1 tablespoon is 30 grams. So you're going to have various components. So you're going to have to record the volumes and then calculate the weight of material, because you're going to calculate the percentage of active ingredient, the Kool-Aid, that goes into here. Remember, calculating percentage means you need to know the total weight of all the components as well as your active. So let's go ahead and get this going. Go ahead and start measuring these things out. Oh, go ahead. If you need to take a break, do so. I don't know.
Almost 11:30.
Oh, wait.
Okay.
Are we gonna measure out the Kool-Aid last?
Yeah, I think so. And again, you're going to, use the fresh one. Mm-hmm. Yeah, coconut butter is a lot easier to work with than Vaseline in that respect.
It's 2 of these, right?
Yep.
Was that your stomach? Or
Hmm?
was that your stomach?
No.
These are weird. This is weird. Is that your stomach? Is it weird?
Those are the beeswax beads. Beeswax beads.
TSB is
TSB.
TSP.
TSP is a teaspoon. Okay. So you want 1.5 tablespoons of 1/2 tablespoon of beeswax. There ought to be a 1/2 tablespoon measure on some of these.
Oh, no,
You
I
want-
need a half.
You need a 1/2. Okay. There.
I found it.
You have a 1/2 tablespoon. Okay. You want to throw that in. Make sure you knock all of them off. Okay. All right. And now you got petrolatum. I think probably we have.
This is the heated. Oh, 1.5.
No, we need 1.5. We need 1.5 tablespoons of petrolatum. Now we had petrolatum on this. We have, so you can get your 1 tablespoon out of there.
First.
Yeah. Going to be.
So did we rinse that or did we just use it?
You would normally get a fresh one, but we had just used that one on petrolatum anyway, so it didn't matter. So you can use another glass rod. You're going to end up using a glass rod anyway. So you can use another glass rod to scrape stuff off the spatula. And eventually, before we even go into to use the microwave, you'll use it to make a rough mix of these components.
Do you want us to
Just roughly.
And then
with a rod?
After we add in, okay, we want to add in,
And then
Yeah.
tablespoon.
Yeah. Is this usable? Can we use this?
what, this stuff?
Yeah, we're making.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. There is nothing in there that is not perfectly safe. That's one of the reasons we use Kool-Aid as our active ingredient. So basically, so now the next thing you do before we even get started on heating is you need to weigh the Kool-Aid and set it aside because we're going to heat this stuff first. Okay, so set this down there for somebody to use. Okay.
Pack it in all.
Oh, no, open it up, pour out the contents, and then we'll set it aside. But record the weight.
It smells good.
Yeah.
Pink lemonade.
And just toss that out. So what's the weight?
7.2 grams.
How much?
7.2 grams.
7.2 grams, okay. Okay, so take the bowl, take the glass rod now, and just sort of mix things up a little bit. You're not terribly worried about getting them really mixed. I just would like to have the components in there working together as we melt it. Okay? And then, clean it off as best you can. And we'll take it into the student lounge and use the microwave oven.
What makes it an active ingredient?
Pardon?
What makes it an active ingredient?
We have defined that as a therapeutic agent, the Kool-Aid. Obviously, Kool-Aid isn't therapeutic, anything but, in fact. But, so let's take the glass rod too, because you're going to be stirring everything up regularly. Let's go to the student lounge. Yes.
How do you document?
No. Okay. So now, what you need to do is take the Kool-Aid. Let's get rid of this and put these someplace. We're going to want to clean them up in a bit. Put the Kool-Aid in and stir that.
Can I put this on the counter?
Yes. Keep stirring it until it starts to get a little thick. And what we want to do is, the reason we want it to start getting thick is if we just stop stirring now, the Kool-Aid will settle out. Because it doesn't particularly dissolve in these greases and oils. Careful of your hair, Glennis.
It's fine.
Okay.
I use coconut oil.
Ah,
Like that, you just go to the store and just color it.
The one I use.
You wash it out.
Yeah.
And then you put it on before you get in the shower.
I leave it in my hair for like 30 minutes. Yeah, before I shower.
What's it do?
Oh, there we go. I get a lot of split ends. So it makes it a little.
I'm gonna try that. I don't spend $30 for this.
I use that horse shampoo.
So which one?
The horse shampoo.
I like that one.
Maybe for horses.
yeah.
Hair and stuff, but I use.
Another thing you can do is take fish oil capsules.
Oh, yeah.
That'll help you.
I
That'll
also-
help your
I
hair. Pardon?
also.
Yogurt and fruit yogurt. Mayonnaise.
Well,
Not your hair.
not
I heard hair on yogurt. I heard yogurt.
I don't know.
Yogurt in there,
Making
huh?
dumb videos sometimes.
yeah,
No.
trying to make a hair smoothie, is that what's called?
I mean, it's a good deal.
I heard mayonnaise.
Okay, so what you're going to do is, once again, let's get a piece of wax paper out here, because what we want to do is actually, once it starts to get a little bit solid, starts to get kind of thick, we want to pour it into these so that you guys can each have a lip balm. You know, keep stirring.
There's a question on, did you want, could we put it in the freezer? Because for this month.
Put it in the freezer?
Yeah.
No, and the reason we don't do that with these kinds of things is that what happens is that when you put it into a refrigerator or freezer or ice bath,
There's still a lot.
yeah, keep stirring vigorously. What happens is that it begins to solidify. And when it solidifies, the Kool-Aid will come out of it. And it won't be uniform. And then when it melts, it'll separate again. Very likely separate. So we keep it going until, and the idea of stirring it until it starts to get thicker is we don't want it to thicken to the point that we have to melt it again just to be able to pour it into these little jars.
That's what I was doing. So it says when melting a number of ingredients, do we want to melt the ingredient with the highest or lowest melting point? When you read the highest.
The highest will be the last to melt. So what we want to do is, when we are mixing these things, we have to note that the lower melting materials, like the petrolatum, is going to be the lowest. Coconut oil will be next, and then the beeswax will be the last to melt. What we need to do is be sure that when we are melting, that we are mixing them thoroughly in the process. If we heat something and melt the highest melting material first and then add other material to it, what's going to happen is that first thing will solidify, unless we still have it in our heating medium. It'll solidify. But also, what we want to do is, when we're melting these things, we want the whole mixture to be liquid at the lowest possible temperature. When we mix in other components that melt lower, then in reality the mixture will have a lower melting point than the highest melting point component, because it'll gradually mix in as we heat it up. So we don't have to actually heat it to the point where the highest melting point actually would melt on its own. And so we want to mix it up in that way.
What would the expiration date be? 6 months?
Yeah, this is going to be a 6-month expiration date because there's no water in it.
And adding water makes it 30 days?
For some things, we have 30 to 60 days, depending on the amount of water. For creams and lotions, where we have water, it's shorter. With no water, it's 6 months, and with just water, like when we did the mouthwash, it's 14 days. Yeah, it's still settling out, so what we want to do is keep mixing.
How do you add the tablespoons together to get grams?
Okay. On page 2 or 3, it lists the weight of a tablespoon, or 2 tablespoons as 60 grams, so 1 tablespoon is 30. Remember, a teaspoon is going to be 1/3 of a tablespoon. And we know the amount of material. So you're going to be calculating a percentage of the active material. So that's one of the reasons we are calculating the total weight of all the components here, because we need to know that.
And then you divide it, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
By the active ingredient?
The active ingredient is divided by the total weight of all ingredients to give us a percentage. It has to be less than 100%.
Okay.
Probably would.
Guess that's not all the good.
Yeah, no freebies. And so the yeah.
Will we
stir
melt it again?
No, we won't have to, but let's stir this a little bit more, and then we'll go ahead and pour it in. When we're pouring it in, remember, you're going to have to be very careful not to spill it all over the place. But if you pour it gently out of the bowl, out of this mixing bowl, it should go. You should be able to fill up these little bottles. Now, when you fill them, you don't fill them all the way up at first. What you want to do is fill them up maybe 3/4 each one, and then top them off. Add a little bit more to each one after that.
So is this gonna be a greasy?
Shouldn't be real greasy. The coconut butter is enough of a fat, and the beeswax should keep it pretty solid.
So do we want to melt ingredients with the highest or lowest melting point?
We will melt. What will melt first will be the lowest melting point. We mix them all together so that we never get the mixture too hot for the lowest melting materials. Because some of these things, if we get them too hot, they will actually they won't so much burn as they will change chemically. They'll be like they char. And so now it's time to pour. That's getting thick enough to pour.
So we would mix them all together.
Mix them together and then melt them.
To the lowest.
Yeah, you're melting the low. You're going to melt the lowest first. So let's work on pouring those. As I say, let's line them up and pour about 1/3 or a half first, and then pour some more into the neck. Pour the next one. Okay. Now top the first one off.
Just make sure that they all have.
Roughly the same amount. Yeah. And you can use your glass rod to scrape. Now, it's all solidifying pretty quickly, so you want to be careful that you get as much out as possible. There you go. Put some more in the second one. And then you guys have some lip balm to take.
We need to make a prescription.
No, actually, you don't really need a prescription for lip balm.
Beautiful.
Okay, so now let's go. So now we put the lids on. You'd clean off the outsides, clean off any of the excess, and then put the lids on, and then all of you have a sample to take home. And several things A lot of times these medicated lip balms, specialty lip balms that are made for individual use, are put into these kinds of jars, ointment jars, but they can also be put into tubes, like your standard lip balm tube. They're fairly easy to fill if you have something like a beaker that you can pour out of that has a lip to it. This mixing bowl works fine for a small amount, but if we were making a large amount, we'd have a little bit different setup.
No, it's good.
Okay? Questions? All right, so here's,
Absorption?
pardon?
Absorption base, would that be what Vaseline is?
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't do that one. How do you do the percentage of active drug?
Remember what we just discussed?
Would be 1.1.
Which one is this? The first one?
Yeah, well, it says what, activity trio says, what is the percent concentration of the active drug? Assume the Vaseline is 15 milligrams.
Right, so you've got 15, yeah,
Mhm.
you've got 15 grams. You're assuming the Vaseline is 15 grams.
Right.
So you add up all of the components. That's going to be the active ingredient is the blue sugar.
Mhm. Which is 1.1 grams.
Right, and how much powdered sugar was there?
1.4. 1.4. Altogether is
1.4
2.5
grams.
grams.
That's right, of the sugars.
But it says just the active.
Yeah, the active. So now we have 15 grams of Vaseline. So all of that has to be added together.
So it's 15.
Well, that's the Vaseline. The active ingredient was just the blue sugar.
So it's also 1.
1.1 over 17 and a half. Right?
16.1.
1.1 over 17.5.
Where are you getting 17?
17 the Vaseline and then 17.
Vaseline is 15.
Yeah, and then, but you
And
have to
then
add up
1.1.
all of the components.
Oh.
So we had 1.1 grams of blue sugar, which is the active, and 1.4 grams of powdered sugar that we're putting together.
So what would be, well, 1.1 is how much the active ingredient is inside the whole thing.
So we do 1.1 divided by 17.5. That's
Okay. We're just looking for that one part of it.
0.062.
And what's that as a percentage?
0.62.
Multiply by 100.
6.2.
6.2%.
Can you go over the 5 types of magnet bases?
You can find those in your text. So you need to read the chapter on compounding,
Oh, well, I'll read.
okay?
Everything changes.
Levigation is actually what we did initially with the powder. Levigation is taking a powder, taking a small amount of liquid or ointment or whatever, and mixing it in to get all of the particles wet. That makes it easier then to mix the rest of the inactive ingredient in and get it uniformly mixed up. Okay, so that's the process of levigation. Bless you.
Oh, thank you.
Bless you again. Okay.
And it's a gritty texture. What's that?
Yeah, like feeling like you're rubbing sand and water between your fingers. That's gritty. And what we want to do is avoid that as much as possible. That's why we grind things into a very fine powder. The finer the powder, the less gritty.
It's okay if I turn this in Monday.
Sure. Yeah, I expect you to, because there's other questions you need to answer. So Monday is great. Okay, so what we need to do is first use paper towels and wipe the grease off the various components that we've gotten grease onto and oil onto. It's going to be a glass rod, measuring spoons, and the bowl. Then we'll wash the sugar and stuff out of the mortar and off the pestle. And we'll put everything over on the little the little cloth surface over there to dry.
So we're washing this with water?
Wash that with water. Everything else gets wiped out with a towel first, and then get the rest of it with the cleaning cloths that we have. Okay.
Yeah, same thing.
Yeah.
So, looks pretty good.